All right, welcome to another episode of the Credder Podcast. I'm your host, Chase Palmieri, and with me today is Andrew Gazdecki. He's a fellow Chico State entrepreneurship graduate and the former CEO of Business Apps and Altcoin, both of which were acquired, and the acquisitions must have left quite an impression because Andrew came out swinging with his next startup, Acquire.com, which is a founder-friendly startup acquisition marketplace that is truly disrupting the world of M&A. Andrew, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, Jace, thanks for having me. Always happy to chat with a Chico, fellow alum, Harvard of the West.
Harvard of the West, absolutely. And I like to say that you and Christian Friedland are probably the crown jewels of that program. But you guys have definitely left a lot of inspiration for the rest of us. So I'm curious, let's dive right in. What was it about the acquisitions of either Business Apps or Business Apps and Altcoin that left this impression on you that there was either a problem that needed solving or there was a better way to do it?
Yeah, good question. So there was a few different sort of ideas around why I felt microacquire needed to exist, but starting from the beginning when I sold Business Apps and that company was acquired, I had like 10 or 20 friends text me, email me, call me, like, how did you find the buyer? How did you go through, like, what are the legal steps? And so that was the first light bulb moment. That was like, okay, there's 1,000 books on marketing, fundraising, product development, but nothing about like the exit, the most important part of the founder's journey, arguably. So I thought there was a huge void there in terms of, educating founders on how to get their companies acquired. And then also, I kind of just scratched my own itch in terms of, I was personally looking to acquire a SaaS company. And I looked around the market and I couldn't really find a good place that I felt really put, the founder first or had quality listings or put trust and security first. And so I felt there's just this, I just saw a market that was really large. And another thought I had was, we're just going to see more and more startups being created, and where are they going to go sell? And so, aside from the typical options of using a broker or an investment banker, I felt a marketplace was a great solution to just kind of bring everyone together, consolidate the industry. And I think when you see a large industry that hasn't seen any innovation in a decade, it's fragmented, it's confusing for all parties involved, and the NPS is just really low. I think it's just a ripe market for disruption, and it's a lot of fun. I get to help founders, get acquired, find buyers, and then also on the buyer side, help buyers acquire other startups. So it's, as a startup fan or geek, whatever you want to call me, it was just it started as candidly a side project, and then it just kind of caught some tailwinds, and having fun ever since.
Yeah, I know there's a few competitors in your space, but it seems like they also emerged at around the same time. So I'm curious, was there a technology breakthrough or something that made this company more able to be founded now than before? Because it seems like a huge market. It seems like a type of business that anybody that works in M&A would maybe want to simplify for their own kind of day-to-day workflows. How come there hadn't been anything like this till now?
Yeah, I'm not, I don't know. That's why I was like, I need to start this company. I think, the other players in the space, like the status quo is kind of what I believe to be our main competitor. And that's, typically working with, an old school business broker or an investment bank. And, those types of services can apply to a lot of different types of businesses, especially on the larger end. So if you're doing like let's call it 20 million and above, I think, having an intermediary makes a lot of sense. Similar to when you're buying a home, you want to have a realtor help you through that process. And what we've done at Microacquire is we've, also brought in brokers and investment bankers, and we'll actually connect startups with intermediaries or advisors, I should say, if need be. But Yeah, I don't know. I think it was just a sleepy market, and the way I've always thought about building companies is you want to look for something that's non-obvious to everybody, but obvious to you today, and then make a bet on that. And so, what I mean by saying that is, I thought entrepreneurship through acquisition was going to be a trend. I thought the democratization of just creating startups through no code platforms and people bootstrapping different startups. Um, we had never seen so many startups being created. Kind of created sort of this perfect environment of, we have a surplus of startups that maybe too small for a broker, maybe too small for an investment bank, and everything that was available to them really favored the buyer, in my opinion. And so a big part of MicroAcquire was, putting the founder first and building tools to make the founder's life easier. So that was just kind of, the initial sort of thought process as I think back.
Yeah, and so to that point, you mentioned that you were looking around to maybe acquire your own SaaS startup company. It seems that maybe you went away from that route to build acquire, but are you still acquiring some of the startups that you see on your own marketplace? Is that something you do from time to time?
No, it's tempting. I mean, because I see great businesses come in all the time, and uh, the reason we don't do that is number one, it would just be a huge, lack of focus. We're completely focused on helping other startups get acquired and helping other people acquire these companies. So no, we've never acquired something that's come in, and also I think that'd be a conflict of interest, which
Probably.
I've told my team that, like, hey, we can't just have like first look and then acquire it. So our goal, and also another kind of analogy is, there's so many people interested in acquisitions right now, way more than 5 years ago. And this is, acquisitions have always been a thing, but my point here is, the people that are acquiring these businesses aren't just Google, Apple, Facebook, what you typically think of as an acquisition, because that's all you really read about. We see first-time buyers. We see what I would consider micro private equity firms that are looking for businesses, doing a couple 100,000 in revenue. So there's been a lot of different sort of, trends or changes in just how people think about acquiring companies. And you know, it's not just the big companies acquiring these businesses. And so, when you're in an environment like that, we want to be the one selling the pickaxes while everyone's mining the gold, if you will.
Right. And to that point, I think I saw a tweet that MicroAcquire or now Acquire shared out about a father who gave his child an option. I could pay for you to go to, 4-year, 5-year college, or I could pay the money for you to acquire a small business SaaS company and learn by actually doing and building that company. And I think the kid actually decided to opt for acquiring the business. And that seems like something that would have been very challenging or maybe not even a possibility before, and that I personally probably would have chosen that route instead of university myself. But when it came to funding Acquire, you obviously had two previous exits. How did you think about whether or not you wanted to self-fund the company or raise money for the business?
Yeah, good question. So I self-funded the business for the first year. I was actually the first. There's a funny tweet that I have where I deposited 200,000 into the microcard bank account. I was like, oh, we just closed our seed round. And then it just got to a point where, once I always say, get a win under your belt and then do whatever you want. Go lay on a beach, swing for the fences. And with this startup, I think just kind of everything aligned in terms of, my personal ambition, the market opportunity. Um, so when the opportunity, presented itself to raise capital, it just made sense. And the way to think about venture capital is it's just a tool. It's a tool that allows you to aggressively attack, the problem that you're going after. And given the size of the market and the opportunity, I felt it made sense for us to let's see if we can really disrupt this market. So that was kind of the thinking. But also in that same vein, both routes are awesome and challenging, come with their, unique pros and cons. Like when MicroAcquire was bootstrapped, as an example, I was doing everything. I was doing support, marketing, podcasts like this, get the word out, product management, like quite literally everything, just to get the business off the ground. But it was so fun, I was able to do that. I don't recommend it. But there's a good saying of, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And so I knew I needed to build a team to really build, Acquire into what I wanted to be.
Yeah, and that actually leads into my next question, which is another kind of saying in startup land, which is hire slow, fire fast. So I'm wondering what it is about your previous experiences with business apps and altcoin that changed how you approached your team building for Acquire.
I would say nothing's really changed. I always look for motivation, attitude, and skill set in that order, because I got to work at the company too. And if you don't have the first two qualities, you're going to have a tough time at a startup. If you're not motivated, if you don't have a positive attitude, you can be the most skilled player on the team. But, it's my job to motivate, but there needs to be some sort of, internal motivation. And another way of saying that is I like to work with people that want to work at MicroAcquire, not just, I want a paycheck and da da da, which is totally fine. But I think when you get that chemistry right, that's when, the real magic happens. And I've always felt that culture is such a huge competitive advantage. So not much has really changed. And also I think there's like 6 or 7 people at Acquire that worked at business apps with me, including my VP of product, my VP of engineering, my chief success officer, my CFO. So I kind of pulled, everyone back, brought the band back together in a sense, if you will.
That's perfect. And maybe that makes it easier because the next thing I wanted to ask you about is about culture in the workplace and this Silicon Valley attitude of bringing every different type of activism into the workplace. Every new political news story or hot topic can sometimes take over a Slack channel. We've seen companies like Coinbase and Kraken kind of create the hard line that, leave your politics at home, none of this kind of discussion in the workplace. You're working for our mission here, and anything else you can do in your own time. Has this been something that you've ever had to talk to your team about, or because you guys have kind of are all on the same mission and have this previous work experience together, it doesn't even come up?
One thing that I've done differently at MicroAcquire or Acquire, gotta get used to saying that. Because for those listening, we're currently going through a rebrand from MicroAcquire to Acquire. But we've made a conscious effort to really focus on building a diverse team. And with that comes just different viewpoints on many different topics. It could be politics, it could be anything really. We haven't had any issues, but it's just as you get to a certain size of a company, those conflicts are going to arise, and I'm sure they will at my company. But no, we haven't had any issues, or we don't debate about politics or anything like that. We try to stay really focused on the work that we got to do, because focus is the most important thing. And any sort of distraction or drama just sucks the momentum and energy out of a team. So luckily, we've hired in a way where again, people align with the values that we all share together, and that's allowed us to move faster and not have to have I have no idea what Coinbase was dealing with. I don't know if it was a full-blown like political debate every day or something like that. But from time to time we'll have discussions, but nothing to the point where we'd put out a policy like Coinbase.
Okay. And as you kind of just mentioned there, and obviously it says micro acquire in the background behind you, you guys are rebranding from micro acquire to acquire. I'm curious how you weigh the pros and cons on a decision like that, because to a certain extent, micro acquire has built some brand recognition in the space. And obviously acquire is, arguably much cleaner, but how did you kind of weigh the pros and cons of making a rebrand when you guys are kind of already on your way and finding great success?
Yeah, good question. So the first thing we did was we just asked all of our users. I ran like Twitter polls, like, hey, should we do this? I obviously own the domain when we were running those polls. um, like because I'd lose all leverage in terms of, purchasing it. But it was something I always wanted to do. You know, someone sent me a Twitter DM saying like, "Whoa, you're actually doing it," and it was from late 2020. So I always wanted Acquired to be, the default sort of, marketplace that you think of when you look to sell your business. But going through the motions, we asked our audience, we asked our customers, I asked my team internally. And the thing about microacquire that I think is limiting, or just having micro in the name, is it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So micro can mean tiny, small, little. And we don't want people to feel that we only support tiny, small, little acquisitions. We want to help founders maximize their acquisitions. And I don't think any founder wants a micro acquisition. They want to maximize it. And so I
Right.
think the name was limiting. And I think with Acquire, it'll allow us to kind of position ourselves in the market as a company that can help, with a 10K acquisition, or, upwards of, $100 million acquisition.
And on that front, what is the smallest acquisition that has gone through the marketplace and the largest, if you have some of those rough figures offhand?
Oh man, off the top of my head. The smallest, I mean, I'm gonna say like $500, two
Oh,
thousand
wow.
bucks.
Wow.
Yeah, we see
So
some
there's
time.
no minimum.
Yeah, there's no minimum. And we've we've seen a few of those, and they're just kind of fun little apps. Like the one that comes to mind is there was a Instagram account full of like dog pictures or something like that, and it had like 1 million followers. And this was when I was just running the business, and I don't know what they sold it for, but I think it was like $1,000 or something like that. So we see interesting businesses like that on the small end. And then on the larger end, we've seen a handful of 8 figures, and then dozens in, the 7 figures. And that's really kind of our goal, is we want to push up our average acquisition size. And so, going back to the rebrand, dropping micro, I think helps better signal to the market that, you know, we can facilitate a micro acquisition or a macro acquisition, and we'll help maximize that, whichever one you are.
Okay. And if I was a founder that wanted to sell my business in the next 6 months, whether on Acquire or some other platform or just through traditional M&A, and I have 6 months to kind of get my business prepared for all of the due diligence that's coming my way. Aside from the obvious, get as much revenue growth as you can between now and the end of that 6 month period and have your books clean and organized, what other advice would you give to a founder to help maximize their exit?
Yeah, it depends on the size of the business. Let's say it's a business doing, a couple million in revenue. I mean, the first thing I'd recommend is, thinking about a succession plan. So who's going to run the business after you? Do you have someone in place? Is everyone going to leave as soon as you sell the business? Because those are critical questions that buyers are going to ask. Having a clean, ideally 3-year profit and loss statement, because most buyers are financial buyers, and that's how they're going to value your business. And just really understanding the acquisition process from start to finish, like what is due diligence. And we have a ton. If you go to acquire.com and just click resources, we have articles written on what is due diligence, what is the legal steps, what is the benefit of an M&A advisor, if that's something that you're interested in, where you have support kind of going through the journey, how to prepare yourself for listing on MicroAcquire, how to create a data room, what to put in it. But the more prepared you are, because it's kind of like listing a house. When you list a house and it goes on the market and you don't really get too many offers within the first 2 weeks, people kind of wonder like what's going on. Another thing I'd add is, having like a good reason to sell the business is always great. So having your story straight. And that could be anything. And it has to be honest. You can't just make it up, because people don't want to buy like a dying business, if you will. Like, I'm obviously selling this because I think it's going to go down or something like that. If that's the case, just be honest about it. Like, hey, this business just isn't working out. I'm not the right person for it. And we see that a lot where you have, kind of the builder selling to the scaler. And then the last piece I would say is, really understanding, how long of a process is going to take. So preparing yourself, just like you would a fundraise, because, you'll meet a buyer and, going through due diligence, like sometimes, from first contact to getting a letter of intent to getting to, a purchase agreement after going through due diligence and getting a closing date, it can take anywhere from like 30 days, like 6 months. So just kind of preparing yourself in advance can make all the difference. I can give you like 10 other tips, but it really just comes down to, being as prepared as possible.
And my understanding is that Acquire has built some kind of layered on services now, like you mentioned, kind of an M&A advisor that I think you guys have kind of tacked on as an additional revenue model. Can you talk to us just about what the kind of basic revenue models that support the business are? I'm assuming one of them is a transaction fee or a percentage of the closing exit, as well as this M&A advisor. Maybe it's an hourly type of situation. So, what are those revenue models as they exist today?
Yeah, so we have a few, and the main one right now is, when you sign up for Acquire as a buyer, you can view all listings, but to get actual information on who the buyer is, what is the startup, basically, information that's sensitive, you have to subscribe to an Acquire subscription. So everything on MicroAcquire is private, and then to actually message the founder, you have to subscribe to a subscription on MicroAcquire. And at that point, we verify your account, we ID verify you. You can submit proof of funds to, really help you stand out with a buyer, or excuse me, a seller. And then we also work with a network of M&A advisors. So depending on the size of the business, if it's in, the 7-8 figure range in terms of, value, we have a network of, legal advisors, M&A advisors, M&A investment bankers, brokers, you name it. And so that's a revenue model where if we make that referral, we'll get, a commission based off of the sale of the business. And then we also have our own in-house brokerage service for businesses that are looking for, a more hands-on approach. And that is specific for SaaS businesses with over $1 million in revenue. And then over time, as our tooling gets more advanced, like we built a LOI builder, we built P&L builder, we built a asset purchase agreement builder, we built, we built this whole flow where you can, close an acquisition without any sort of intermediary or, advisor in place. And our goal is to get that tooling to a point where, we'll capture commission on every transaction that goes through that flow. And that, I think we'll probably aim for like Q2 of flipping commissions on for that. But right now you can list on MicroAcquire entirely free, without any sort of commissions.
Okay, cool. So let's get a little bit to kind of founder advice questions here, kind of the entrepreneur 101 stuff, because you're really great at this. Been following you on, all accounts, Twitter, LinkedIn for years now, and it's been hugely helpful. So I want to dive into this issue of marketing, sales, distribution, brand, and storytelling. These are often seen as secondary to building a great product for first-time founders, especially. Why are they wrong?
Well, if no one can find your product, no one's going to buy it. Like, I think, like, simple as that. Startups, I think a lot of founders think, and sometimes this is the case. You build a product, it's so good, and word of mouth spreads and it goes viral, but the chances of you doing that are so unlikely. You can give me examples, you can give me Steve Jobs quotes, whatever, but you're not, that founder. And I think the advice I try to give is, it's not necessarily saying product isn't important. It's just saying, like, hey, if you realistically want to have like a good shot at building a, a business or a startup, you have to understand that there are hundreds of thousands of startups being created every day, not every day, every year, or potentially millions. I don't know. And your main competition, in my view, is just customer attention. There are just so many different startups, and I see hundreds on a daily basis. We have 2,000 plus startups that submit to Microquire alone to be listed every single month. So, the more that you're able to, build, distribution kind of as a competitive advantage. And I think this is why business apps was successful. Was I would even tell my team, like, we're not a product company, we're a distribution company. And that was through, partnerships, through a white label reseller network. And that really allowed us to, just focus on technology, but have this kind of global sales force, if you will. So I think as a founder, if you're not skilled in sales and marketing, just learn, because it'll just make everything so much easier. Like finding those first customers, because you need those first customers to give you feedback to help you improve your product. And that helps you find product market fit faster. And then you have kind of the worst approach I think you could take is, building in stealth mode and waiting a year before you launch. Like, bring users along with your journey, like get constant feedback, constant iterations, because that's what a startup really is. It's just, a series of experiments until something kind of clicks. And the more experiments you can run and actually get feedback from customers, the higher chances you have of finding product market fit and then finding a go-to-market strategy that works for you, so you can predictably and repeatably, acquire customers.
Yeah. Recently, in the last couple of weeks, there was a product that went viral without much, branding or storytelling, which is ChatGPT. So I want to jump into this a little bit. I'm curious, what jobs at a startup, not necessarily kind of a larger institution, but kind of a startup, maybe team of 5 to 20 people, what jobs in that early days startup do you see ChatGPT replacing in the next 5 to 10 years? Whether it be sales,
Uh,
marketing, copywriting, HR, legal, there's a lot of AI legal innovations coming around as well. Are there any specific jobs that you think are soon to be replaced by AI?
uh, you know, I wouldn't say I'm an expert at answering this. I think, from what I've seen thus far, and I could be totally wrong, but I think the tools are new, and as they advance, I think it'll become more obvious. But some of the clear use cases are just marketing, copywriting. You could put your sales sequence emails into ChatGPT and probably get a better version of them. I candidly haven't dug into the tool, or I don't even pay attention to the AI market, to be completely honest. So I'm not an expert on it.
You didn't
I
even play around with it when it came out?
I typed in stuff like, "Hey, tell me a story about Nicolas Cage and a venture capitalist and a startup founder walking into a bar." And those were kind of funny. But I mean, that's all I did. I just played around with it. I didn't, we don't have any use cases that might require yet. But I think in the future there could be opportunity, but we just haven't dug in enough yet.
Okay. And so turning a little bit to your personal life here, at one point, your now wife was just the girlfriend of a struggling startup founder, right? You hadn't yet had your big successes that would make it easier for her to obviously support you on your second or third business. So I'm curious, what are the kind of character traits, or maybe you can either talk directly about your partner or in general, but what should a founder be looking for in their life partner if they know that they're an entrepreneur and they're going to have this long career of starting, operating, failing, succeeding from time to time? What are the traits in a partner, or maybe you can speak about your own wife, that make her a founder friendly life partner?
That's an interesting question. I think this is a tough one. I mean, I think if you're like an entrepreneur, it should be pretty obvious. So maybe a chief of staff is kind of, what your girlfriend or fiance is kind of signing up for. But my wife Michelle, she's also an entrepreneur. She owns a recruiting company that does like 3-4 million in EBITDA a year. She balls out. And she started the business right after college, just like I did, you know, worked basically, and it wasn't just like it was a slow, steady, you know, building of the company. So I think we share a lot of the same traits in terms of just entrepreneurship and, building businesses. And she's really, really savvy in terms of, you know, every sort of hard question I have in terms of decisions I'm making at most of my companies. I've always called her kind of like the secret co-founder of most of my companies. She knows every employee's name. She knows, every feature that we're working on. I don't know how she puts up with me talking about, microacquire or any of my businesses, or I should say, I gotta get used to acquire. Gosh. Um, uh, but I mean, I would say just, find someone that, has qualities that you like, and then, but I think this is a tricky question because, on one hand, you don't want to dedicate like your entire life to entrepreneurship and have a partner that, like, hey, like you're okay with me being an entrepreneur, right? You know, I think there needs to be kind of a middle ground. So I don't know. I've never given relationship around this topic, but I guess whatever makes you happy is kind of what I'm going to leave it at. I'm going to cop out this one.
All right, fair enough. And then you're often talking about how, as long as you can stay alive, every day you can stay alive is a, day to fight again and give your business a chance at future success. And to some degree, absolutely, there are some startups that take longer to, really start to see traction than others. But what are some signs, or maybe you wouldn't say that there's ever a time when a startup founder should call it quits, but are you kind of like, until every dollar in the account is gone, keep trying? Or is there some type of a startup or some signs that you think, okay, maybe it is time to call it quits? And that could be that the CEO has lost interest or something like that, but at what point should a company think about winding down?
Yeah, if it's not going well, if you're running out of money, if you're running out of motivation, if it's, harmful for you on a mental level, like startups are, in my opinion, a big part of mental game. Because one day you're, on top of the world, the next day you're like, how am I going to make this work? One day you're like, how am I going to spend my billions? And the next day you're like, how am I going to make payroll? Like these are jokes I always make. So I think, it just depends. If it's just gotten to a point where it's clearly not working, I think there's some obvious signs like, there's no traction with the business. You're using your personal finances. You're putting your family in harm's way in terms of, supporting them. I think that those are obviously very valid reasons to say, hey, let's kind of shut this business down. Or if you're just gaining weight, not taking care of yourself, stressed out all the time, startups are a journey. And if you're not able to enjoy that journey, you should quit. I always say, if it's not fun, it's not worth it. So I would probably just leave it at that. If you're not enjoying it, quit. Like that's the beauty of startups is you can build whatever you want, you can work with whoever you want, and focus on whatever you want. And if for some reason none of those things are working out and you're just not enjoying it, maybe you still got to push through because you have some obligations to investors. I think that can be fixed in terms of focusing on your zone of genius instead of your zone of competence by delegating, what you don't like to do and just focusing on what you like to do. But there's a ton of different scenarios where it makes complete sense to just, if your business just isn't working and you've exhausted everything that you can think of, then there's nothing wrong with failing, because that's where you learn the most. And I think if you look at every successful founder, they have like 10 failures behind them. There's nothing wrong with failure. I'd like to see that normalize a little bit more. And I think we're going to see a lot of startups, unfortunately, go through this really hard process over the next few years. So yeah, I would just say, exhaust every option and just kind of ask yourself, why did you start this business in the first place? What outcome were you looking to achieve? Are you on track for that? And if not, maybe there is a opportunity for you to just have a hard conversation with yourself on whether it's worth continuing.
Okay. And maybe a slightly trickier question for you here is we've seen a lot of layoffs in the tech space in recent weeks and months. The looming recession, high cost of business, lower PE ratios. There's a lot of reasons why a lot of companies are having to make very hard but necessary cuts to their payroll. Because oftentimes payroll is the most expensive piece of operating a business. So I'm curious, with where Acquire is at today, you are a marketplace, you are a kind of technology-driven platform. What do you think, gun to your head, if you had to scale back to, fight another day, what would be the smallest team that you guys could continue to operate the business at?
We would need everyone we have today. We've been very meticulous with our hiring. So we kind of got lucky in a sense. We didn't, or not lucky, I guess we weren't super drunk at, the party that I think all of tech startups, if you will, had over the last 2 years. I've always been a big proponent of, you want to hire slow because that allows you to, really let the person settle in, really adapt to the culture. Because when you start just like hiring so many people, I think that's when cultures fall apart the fastest. And I've seen it happen. You go from like 10 to 100 employees in a year. It's like, that's really cool, but it's very hard to maintain, that culture that I think is required. And so I've always focused on just building like this baseline culture and then adding additional people on top of that. So, I mean, we're at a point where, and another thing I always have told my team is, we only hire when it hurts. So we don't throw bodies at issues. We try to think of creative ways of maybe automating certain parts or making things more efficient. And I think that's how every startup should be thinking. But yeah, I think if anyone on my team left, we would probably need to hire a replacement for that person.
I really like that, hire when it hurts. That's a really great way to think about it. Okay, so last question for you here before we turn to kind of the two questions that I ask every guest that comes on the podcast. It's around the dirty word of capitalism. It's been kind of thrown around in the mud in recent years. There's a lot of young people who believe that capitalism is, maybe a negative concept, a negative approach to how the world operates. I'm just wondering, as an entrepreneur who, has created value in the marketplace and been able to capture that value and improve the lives of your employees and family members because of this kind of hard work to build value in the market. Would you consider yourself a capitalist? Why not?
Never really thought of that. I guess. I mean, I don't even know what the definition of a capitalist is. So this is a hard one for me.
I'll look it up
Uh,
while you talk. Go ahead.
well, I guess I make businesses and I try to create value. So yeah, I guess you would say I'm a capitalist.
I don't like the definition here. It says a wealthy person who uses money to invest in trade and industry for profit in accordance with the principles of capitalism. But that's not, hmm. Well, I guess if instead of thinking about it as, are you a capitalist, do you believe that capitalism is still the best um, way for a country or individuals to be able to operate as opposed to other, you know, forms of these institutions? Do you think capitalism is still the best out of all available options?
What are the other options?
Socialism, communism, anything that limits the ability for an individual to just go off, start a business and try to create value.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with capitalism. Again, I'm not a very political person, so uh, yeah, never really thought of it that way. But I think you know those other options sound pretty bad, so I'll go I pick capitalism.
All right, gotcha. All right, so last two questions for you here, Andrew. But before I get to them, why don't you give listeners some places they can go to follow the work you're doing, follow Acquire, any links that you want to kind of have me list out in the show notes?
Yeah, just follow me on Twitter, Gazdecki, or just acquire.com.
All right. So Bitcoin, believer, not so much, don't know enough about it. Where are you today on Bitcoin?
I mean, I think it's interesting. I think because I did start a crypto protocol company, so I'm pretty versed in just Bitcoin. I've been one time I was true story. I bought like 200 Bitcoins one time for like 25K, and then I sold it for like 30K, and I thought it was a
Wow.
genius. I'm obviously not. So I was buying Bitcoin when it was like 100, like 200. I remember when Ethereum was at uh, I remember there was a day when Ethereum was first introduced on Coinbase, and there was a Bitcoin ETF coming out with an approval or denial. And I moved all of my Bitcoin holdings into Ethereum, just like, oh, what is this new thing on Coinbase? And then that obviously exploded. But I frankly don't own any cryptocurrency anymore, so I don't really have a dog in the fight. So I would say I'm a supporter from the sidelines, but I don't have a strong opinion.
Okay. And last question for you, Andrew, is are we living in a simulation?
I'm gonna say no.
Okay. All right. Well, Andrew, thanks so much for your time today, man. We're here right before the holidays, so I'll let you get back to your family. Thank you again. Love the work that you and your team are doing for entrepreneurs. You've been doing it as an individual, sharing your thoughts and ideas, but now you've really built this incredible platform around around helping make exits for founders easier and at all sizes. So thank you so much, and hope to chat with you again soon. Take care.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me, Chase.